At your job, do you ever have to deal with a nose roller? How about a snub pulley? Well, if you're installing a new conveyor belt system, dealing with the different components can sound like you're speaking a foreign language. Luckily, you've got a team ready to help. Grainger's technical product specialists are fluent in maintenance, repair, and operations. So whenever you want to talk shop, just reach out. Call, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
Hi, everyone, and welcome on into another edition of Eye on the Enemy, part of the Eagles Pin Pull Network. I'm your host, John Stolnis. You can follow me on X at John Stolnis. I write for BleedingGreenNation.com, and I do podcasts for the Eagles Pin Pull Network, and we are coming up on the start of the 2024 Eagles season, and the news is coming fast and furious as we are gearing up for Eagles-Packers in Brazil. I'm going to have some thoughts on the wisdom of having teams go play over in Europe to start the season on a Friday night. Spoiler alert, I think it's stupid. But we're going to get into that coming up here in the next few minutes. Also, some news with James Bradberry, the fallout from the injury and the IR placement. We'll talk about that. And we'll jump in on a couple other things as well. We're going to talk also with Dan Pizzuta, an NFL writer for the 33rd Team, which is a great website covering the NFL. We'll get his thoughts on the Eagles and the rest of the NFC, and a little bit about the AFC as well, as we get an eye on the enemy. We take a look around the league and see what's going on with the Eagles' enemies and how things are shaping up. So all that coming up here on this edition of Eye on the Enemy. Now, as most of you listening by now already know, James Bradberry, who I still think was a bit of a surprise that he ended up making the 53-man roster. A bit of unfortunate news for the Eagles after he suffered an injury at practice, a leg injury that is expected to keep him off the roster for 6 to 8 weeks. It's not an injury that's going to require surgery, but it's a lower leg injury, which, I mean, we can't zero in anymore on that, guys. We don't know if it's ankle, shin, knee, foot, toe. What does he have? Does he have eczema on the back of his leg? Like, what are we talking about here? What's the injury? But we don't get to know that. All we get to know is that he's expected to miss 6 weeks to 2 months here, and I know that in my initial reaction was, oh, are they just trying to get out of having him on the roster? That was those slick Eagles. They find every roster management trick in the book. But this isn't that, right? The whole idea, I think, of keeping James Bradberry on the roster was they really were trying to find a trade partner for him. And now that is not going to happen. He's going to be on the roster. The Eagles have placed him on injured reserve, and he had been transitioning from cornerback to safety. So it doesn't impact the safety depth too much at this point, because I think you had to look at James Bradberry as probably the number 5, because you had Reed Blankenship, C.J. Gardner-Johnson. Those are your starters. Avonte Maddox was the number 3 safety, and Tristan McCollum, I think, was ahead of Bradberry on the depth chart as well. The Howie Roseman had said the transition was moving along slowly, but at least he was there to give you some backup at safety and at cornerback. So now they lose that guy for 6 to 8 weeks, and you don't have the ability to trade him away. So this was not an outcome the Eagles wanted. This was not something that they planned. This is not some sly maneuvering by Howie Roseman to try and finagle James Bradberry through the roster process or anything like that. So they may have to get a guy off the practice squad. They have a few undrafted rookies that they could bring up. They could hit the waiver wire and see if there's a safety out there that they want to have in case they wanted to carry a 5th one, because obviously they did when they announced the 53-man roster. But that's where things stand with the James Bradberry injury. Again, kind of a weird move to actually keep him on the roster, but that's what happened, and unfortunately for the Eagles, that looks like the window to trade him is completely gone. One other quick note before we get to my interview with Dan Pizzuta. The Eagles announced that they're going to unveil a new uniform look for the game in Brazil. We are going to see the Eagles go white jerseys and black pants. Never seen this combination before for the Eagles' Week 1 game in Sao Paulo, Brazil. And it's also with the black helmet. So the black helmet, white uniform top, and black pants. I kind of dig it. looks like a pretty good. It looks like a pretty good uniform look. The black helmet obviously is new. We haven't seen the Eagles wear the black helmet. We've seen them use the midnight green helmet with their white jersey and black pants. And I gotta say, I didn't like the black helmet initially. I thought it looked very nondescript when the Eagles released it during the course of the offseason, but it looks good like this. Now, the Eagles are not wearing green, which is, of course, the main color. It's also a color that apparently you're not allowed to wear in Sao Paulo, Brazil. There had been some rumors before. I think, I forget, there was a player, I think it was Josh Jacobs, who said in a podcast that NFL security told them that neither team can wear their color of green simply because there are gangs in that area of the country that it's part of, like, you can't wear that color there, or else you're going to be identified as being a part of this gang or that gang or whatever. Now, I guess that, they don't want fans wearing those colors coming in there, or, it didn't make a whole lot of sense to me. But the color green is apparently not allowed, or it's seen as like a something that you shouldn't wear. But the Packers are going to wear green. They're going to wear their green jerseys. It's going to be their typical home uniform combination. So I don't know. I don't know what the truth is. There have been reports that the color has nothing to do with gangs. The fact that it's going to be taking place in Neoquímica Arena. It's the home of the Brazilian soccer team, the Corinthians. Their colors are black and white, and their main rivals wear green. So I don't know. I don't know that there's anything really to make out of this whole thing. I will just tell you, I really dislike the fact the Eagles are starting the season in Brazil. I just want us to start a season on a Sunday. It's my old man gripe. Give me a good old-fashioned Sunday 1:00 start time to kick off the season. Let us get into the season normally. I know the players don't like it. Devontae Smith was asked about it at a press conference this week. He says, "How do you feel about playing in Brazil?" And he essentially said no comment. AJ Brown said this week that after getting an update from security officials that he just plans on staying in the hotel room the whole time. So it's just a distraction. And this is a team coming off of last year. You just don't want any distractions. You don't want anything taking away from them just getting ready for a season, getting ready for a game. Get some regularity to your schedule going. I don't like this. I think it's a bad idea. I think the NFL is trying to do too much with all this stuff. I just wish this team. This is part of the penalty for being a marquee team, right? The Bengals don't have this problem. The Texans don't have this problem. The Commanders don't have this problem. They're not a team that the NFL networks, the NFL wants to showcase. So you're not going to see them on Sunday Night Football, Monday Night Football, Friday Night Football, Wednesday Night Football. We make up an 8th day of the week so that the NFL can jam another game down our throats every day of the week. Like, just it's too much. It's enough. All right, just let these guys play on Sundays. It's just it's my old man gripe. I said it before. I'll say it again. It's just it's enough already. I'm not at all happy with this team going to Brazil to start the season, because after the way things ended last season, I just want a little bit of normalcy to this 2024 Eagles season. And I think the more normal this season can get, the better off the Eagles are going to do. But the Eagles are a marquee franchise. Jalen Hurts is a marquee talent. There's a ton of talent on this team, big name players, big jersey sales, all that stuff. So I get it. I just don't like it all that much. Well, we are now ready for the start of the 2024 NFL season. Of course, here in Philadelphia, high hopes for an Eagles team that obviously stumbled badly at the end of last year, but things looking up here in 2024. We think, at this point at least anyway, that's the way it's kind of the vibes are feeling right now here in the Delaware Valley. But I also wanted to take a look around the league. Of course, this is the Eye on the Enemy podcast, and I'm looking to talk to folks who can help us scope out what's going on around the rest of the league, and specifically in the division. division and the NFC. Joining me to do that, a good friend of the podcast, Dan Pizzuta, NFL writer for the 33rd Team. You can follow him on X at Dan Pizzuta. The 33rd Team is a fantastic site. I'm sure most of you check that out on a regular basis. Dan, thanks for joining me again here on Eye on the Enemy. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
It's great to talk to you again. And one of the things that I want to get out of the way first is I want to talk about this game in Brazil that the Eagles are going to play against the Packers. They've been doing more international games, obviously, over the last decade or so, but this is going to be a Friday night game. It's in a place, São Paulo, Brazil, which I don't know if you saw any of the quotes from A.J. Brown when he was meeting with the press earlier this week, but he was essentially saying, like, while we're there, I'm just going to stay in my room because they got like a whole readout of like security issues, like things you can't do while you're there. He was saying like things you take for granted here in the U.S., like you can't walk down the street with your phone in your hand in the place where they're going to be playing. Nobody's allowed to wear green because apparently that has something to do with there has been rumors like it either has to do with like the gang colors in the area or the opposing soccer team in the area wears green. It's just, this to me sounds like a complete train wreck. But I mean, the Eagles are going to spend, I think, like 3 days in Brazil. Like they're not going there to like hang out and have fun. Like this is a straight up business trip for the Eagles. So I'm just kind of curious, what are your thoughts on this Brazil trip? I'm 100% wholly against it. I think it's a terrible idea. Maybe it's just this location specifically, but it seems to me for the Eagles and Packers, it puts them in a bad position, comparatively speaking, to the rest of the league. I'm worried how it's going to affect them after this trip is over.
Yeah, it is interesting because I think they have kind of figured out a way to, where this international travel is not as big of a deal as, it kind of was in the beginning. Because I remember when, you first did the London games, everyone was like forced to take their bye afterward. And then teams kind of figured out how to travel. So I think the travel part of it has, I think, gotten easier as teams have kind of figured out how to do some of these longer distances. I'm just mostly against any games that are putting them on different days of the week. Like, yeah. Just as someone who does this professionally, like Friday is nice kind of without football. So to jump in a Thursday, Friday, Sunday, Monday, and then we'll go to another Thursday. Eventually it's a lot. So I understand what they're doing. But just like I would like a day off, even just to start the season here. Especially now we're going to get Christmas games on a Wednesday. Like we could just stick to the normal days.
I realize it's kind of like anytime you get an upgrade on your computer software or something or on your phone, like it very rarely upgrades anything. It's just we keep adding on, hanging extra ornaments onto a Christmas tree that's already full. Like everybody loves a Christmas tree. But when it's got just the right amount of decorations on it, right? If you just start hanging stuff on every branch, it starts to look like a big old ugly mess. And that's what the NFL is doing with adding extra weeks to the season, with adding all these extra different trips, playing games on every single day of the week now. I mean, I'm a crusty 47-year-old fan who's been watching football since the late 80s, and I miss games on Sunday afternoon and with the occasional Monday night game. You know what I mean? Like that's Sunday night, Monday night, and that's about all I really want in terms of something other than Sunday afternoon, because it used to be just kind of a nice ritual. You sit down, you watch your NFL, you watch your team play on Sunday, and then you get the special primetime game once or twice a year, and it was kind of like a special event. But now it's just, I think one of the reasons the Eagles stumbled last year, and it's a reason not many people talk about, is the fact they did not have a schedule. Every week was different. They're at 4, then they're playing Sunday night, then they're playing Thursday night, then they had 2 Sunday 1:00 games last year. Like it's just, I just don't know how as an NFL player you can get into any kind of rhythm when your schedule is all over the place like that.
Yeah, that's probably, it is true, and it's just kind of one of those things that you kind of have to deal with, and probably something that we're just going to see more of. I think at least the good thing for this Friday night game is it is a matchup worth watching, because sometimes they will throw some of these games on at a weird time or whatever, and we're talking ourselves into like Saints Titans or something, and you're like, well, I do have to watch this, but at least Eagles Packers should definitely be a fun one.
Yeah, that's for sure. These are two of the very best teams in the NFC, and I'm going to talk about the NFC, what teams how the rosters and all that kind of stuff in just a second. But let me get your thoughts on the Eagles on the field. It seems like there's a wide range of possibilities with this team.
Yeah.
I think this is a Super Bowl champion possible team. Like, they have enough talent on the roster. I think it's a good enough team that can win the Super Bowl. I think they certainly can be a Super Bowl contender. You have the quarterback who, if he's at the top of his game, makes this team a Super Bowl contender. I also see a scenario where they miss the playoffs and everybody gets fired, So what is your overall outlook, your vibes check on the 2024 Eagles as they're about ready to start the season?
Yeah, that's pretty much kind of where I would put it, right? It definitely, the ceiling is there if everything does click. I think they can be one of the best teams, in the NFC. You see where, even last year when things kind of stumbled, Jalen Hurts was still a top 10 quarterback by EPA per play. I think he was, just outside in success rate. So there was still a lot to like from what he did individually. And I think you kind of look at what this offense can be structurally with Kellen Moore. I think if it all clicks, it can be good. I think, but like you said, I don't think there's a floor where, this team is bad, but I think they could be fine and maybe miss the playoffs. And again, that's probably not good enough and would have some, sweeping changes.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there is still a very wide range of possibilities for this Eagles team, but I do think they put the ceiling much higher than it would have been last year if everything had gone right.
And so much of this is dependent on Jalen Hurts, like I just mentioned a moment ago. And I think that coming into 2024, I think he's better set up for success than he was last year. He's had a longer offseason. I don't think there are nearly as many distractions as there were coming off the Super Bowl 2 seasons ago. And by all accounts, in training camp, he looked fantastic. Now, we didn't get to see him in a preseason game. I would have liked to have seen him in the number one offense in a preseason game, even just a quarter. I miss when teams used to do that again. It's the old fan in me wishing to see a little bit of the number one offense. And I think we saw a couple of teams do that this summer, play the starters a little bit in the preseason, just a little bit to get him a bit of a taste. But as far as Jalen Hurts is concerned, what is your outlook for him here in 2024?
Yeah, I think it could be a good season still. I think he'll be definitely helped out by the offense. I think he's, probably, in the league, a borderline, like, top 10 type of guy. So I think that is definitely going to be something that happens. He still is a guy that has gotten better every year, which is impressive. And I think there's something that, continues to add to his game. I think there will be a little more comfort as we get at least a little further into the season. Maybe it might look a little rusty, over the first couple weeks as they're getting, more of this motion and things like that. Things that I think over the long run will definitely be helpful to him and the offense. But maybe, it wouldn't be surprised if it doesn't, click immediately. But I do think this offensive structure, how they're going to be able to kind of move around some of those receivers, maybe get Saquon Barkley a little more involved in the passing game more than a running back really has been for the Eagles during Hurts's tenure so far. I think all of these things that are around him are also going to help him, to have a better season and, sustained success, I think, in 2024.
So as you look at this Eagles team, which area of the team would give you the most cause for concern? They obviously made a lot of changes in the secondary. They drafted Quinyon Mitchell early in the draft. They got Cooper DeJean, who has missed a lot of the summer with an injury, so they'll start him off slow. But the pass defense was a big problem last year. They really improved that. For me, Dan, it's the pass rush. I don't know if they will be able to make up for the loss of Hassan Reddick. The stuff I heard about Bryce Huff this offseason, this summer, just didn't hear him talked about all that much. And to me, that's the biggest concern. But there's obviously issues with, how will the head coach work with the coordinators? And there's still some weaknesses, I think, on the defense there. What is your take on the weakest part of the Eagles right now?
Yeah, that's probably where I'd be too, especially when you kind of, the Eagles have been trying for a while to get the Vic Fangio style defense. Then they just kind of figured that hasn't worked, so let's just try the actual guy. I have a little bit of pause for that because I think there are some offenses around the league that really have figured out how to work around that defense as that defense has started to spread to more defenses across the league. So I am just structurally very interested in how that's going to work out, especially with how things worked with Fangio in Miami last season, which I thought was going to be a better fit than it was. And then once he left for Philadelphia, I think there were a lot of very outspoken Dolphins that
Yeah.
there was not a great mesh between the coach and the players there. So that is something I am a little worried about, seeing if that is something that is going to be able to sustain for the entire season. And like you said, like the secondary is it's tough. I think we have seen rookie corners step in and be good more so in the past couple of years than we have previously. Usually cornerback was this position where, it took till, year two, sometimes year three for guys to really make an impact. But since like was it the 2020, 2021, when we had, Sauce Gardner, Tariq Woolen, Derek Stingley, like those guys, it's the same thing we kind of say with the wide receivers, and why rookie wide receivers have been so good coming in is because they're getting all these reps of coming up, into college, even before college. And it's the same thing, like these cornerbacks are the guys covering them. So they do have a lot more reps now. So I'm not as worried about some of the, sticking a rookie out there and really hoping, but it's good. But, you have Darius Slay, who's been getting up there in age and up and down. You already, like James Bradbury, already hurt. That is, it's kind of feels like a slightly thin secondary that I don't think has a very wide margin for error. And like you said, like I still think the pass rush is going to be good, right? Jalen Carter is going to be really good. I've been a fan of Bryce Huff for a really long time, but it's not as deep as the Eagles have been. And that's like one of the things that really made this pass rush so special over the past like couple years is you could like hockey line change this entire defensive line, and it was still really good at creating pressure. I don't know if they'll have that this year. So they're really going to need the guys to either one, be on the field more than they have been in the past, or you just really have to be impactful when they are on the field. And I think there are still some things on that defense for everything to come together that concerns me a little bit.
Let's take a look at the division a little bit. And the NFC East hasn't had a repeat division champion since 2004. This is still one of the most bizarre records in NFL history. It's been 20 years since a team has repeated as division champions in the NFC East. Last season, the Cowboys won the division. It looked like it was going to be the Eagles. It looked like they were going to break that streak last year until the collapse, of course. So the Cowboys win the division. Do the Cowboys break the streak? And this is my way of asking you to talk a little bit about the Cowboys and where they stand after an offseason that I know a lot of Dallas fans were disappointed in. Finally got the CeeDee Lamb contract worked out, but it just seemed like that was a bad vibes offseason for Dallas. And I wonder how you feel like they are looking coming into the season.
Yeah, it was certainly a weird vibes season for Dallas, where a lot of the things that put them in trouble just could have been avoided if they had done things earlier. And I think when you look at like what the Eagles do, they sign everybody super early. That helps lower cap rates at earlier places, and you can spread them out longer because these deals can be pushed out longer. And Dallas just doesn't do that. They wait till the last minute on every contract that they can have. The thing is, once Dallas gets on the field, that isn't necessarily going to matter, because I still think this is going to be a good offense. Like just, Dak throwing to CeeDee Lamb 180 times is probably going to be enough for this offense to be good. You can still definitely have questions about what they have now outside of Lamb at receiver. I think the, tight end, they're still going to be able to, be all right there. So I think this is going to be an above average offense still. Defense is going to be interesting because, you have Mike Zimmer coming in. I still think, again, you just have like Micah Parsons there, and that's going to be enough to just wreak havoc and make things easier on a secondary. So I still think Dallas is going to be one of the better teams in the conference, but I do think the ceiling is probably a little lower. So like, this wouldn't be something where I say Dallas is going to be a potential Super Bowl team, like I maybe would have said going into last year, but I still think they'll be fighting for the division just because I think that the top end talent is too good not to be doing that.
How possible do you think it is that the Commanders would take a step forward and battle for a playoff spot. I don't know that they can win the division, but I don't know. They got a rookie quarterback, and he's obviously Jaden drafted very high, number 2 overall pick. I guess this is my way of asking what you think of him and how you think it will affect the Commanders' outlook here in 2024.
Yeah, that's a tough one because we really still don't know a lot about what that offense is really going to look like. I think when we saw it in the preseason, we had the one really cool throw in the first preseason game, the deep slot fade to
Yeah.
De'Ami Brown. But then everything else outside of that was, it was a lot of RPOs and screens and things, and it was a very horizontal offense that we've kind of seen with Cliff Kingsbury before, but I would expect they will be a little more vertical because of what Jaden Daniels can do, but also, would have expected that back in Arizona with what Kyler Murray can do, because Kyler Murray has a great arm too. So the offensive structure does concern me a little bit, as does Jaden Daniels' willingness to take a hit either in the pocket or on the run and behind an offensive line that might not be very good. That does concern me a little bit for how successful this offense can be, to sustain it, because I do think that that'll put him in more danger than he needs to be, especially if he's like trying to make a play in a broken offense, which I think we kind of saw Kyler Murray do
Yeah.
a decent amount. But the difference between, a Kyler Murray and a Lamar Jackson type runners is they just have amazing spatial awareness and they do not take big hits in the open field.
Mm-hmm.
And Jaden Daniels in college was a guy who was looking for that hit. And that was one of my biggest concerns about him kind of coming out. So it could hit. Like I wouldn't be predicting the Commanders to be a playoff team. I think this is still something that needs to be worked out a little bit. I think you look at like what their receivers are outside of Terry McLaurin. I was always a big De'Ami Brown fan, but that's not going to have a great offense if he's like your number 2 guy. I mean, the defense, like they brought in a bunch of veterans, but that's not something where I think they're going to be, a top unit either. So I think there's Washington definitely has a better future outlook than they would have had in the past for, the past couple years. But
Right.
for them to kind of leap in year one, I'd be a little hesitant to say they would do that.
So if you had to put money on it, who has the best roster in the NFC right now?
I'd still say it's San Francisco. Um, just because of how crazy that offense is. Again, like you can pick out one piece, and if one piece isn't working, they have 9 other ways to beat you on offense. And especially, with a running back like Christian McCaffrey, who can really change the dynamic of that offense because he is like the one true guy that can line up in the slot outside the different looks that they're able to give on that offense. I just think with how kind of deep they are there, I think it makes them kind of slightly further above everybody else. But I do think, especially with some of the defensive changes they've had, it's probably closer than it was last year, where I think, San Francisco would have been far and away the best roster in the conference last year. And I think it's a little closer, but I would still give them the edge.
Which team or teams around the league do you see taking a step forward this year? Kind of like what we saw from the Packers and Lions a year ago.
Yeah, so I would still lean like Packers because I still think there's another leap for them to have off of what they had last year. Because I think
they're so young last year,
yeah, that was the thing. And I think, over the second half of the season, they really found a groove of what worked for Jordan Love, the type of offense that Matt LaFleur wanted to be able to call. I think during the first half of the season, they didn't really have that mesh figured out. It was still a lot of Matt LaFleur was still kind of running the Aaron Rodgers offense, which wasn't necessarily what LaFleur came in to his Packers run wanting to run. So I think there was still, working it out there mid-season. They really figured it out. Jordan Love was playing looser, and he was one of the best quarterbacks over the second half of the season, especially going into that Dallas playoff game, which was just, I think, one of the best playoff games we've seen it from a quarterbacking perspective, production wise. So I think there is certainly a higher ceiling they can have on offense. And then that defense, I'm very interested in what that defense is going to be. Kind of talked about the Fangio defense spreading out throughout the league. The Packers are going the complete opposite. They were one of those teams that wanted that Fangio defense, but now what they brought in with Jeff Hafley on from Boston College on defense, he's a guy that's going to be running a lot of single high, a lot of aggressive man coverage. I think that does fit this Packers roster better on defense. And if that is something that clicks, like I think, people like me and guys who, talk about the league, we've been liking the Packers defensive roster for a while, but the scheme always kind of let them down. A lot of off coverage and, giving 8-yard cushions that opposing offenses were just able to completely run through. And so I think if this defense does click, this gives the Packers a really high ceiling. And I think instead of just being, a team fighting for the division, this could be one of the top teams in the conference if everything does go right for them.
Now, I ask you a team that you think is going to take a step forward. Are there any teams, and it doesn't have to be NFC, you could look around, it could be the AFC as well. Any teams that you see that might take a step backwards this year?
Yeah, Cleveland, I think is one that kind of stands out. I think it's going to be hard for the defense to be as good as it was last year. And I think that was really what kept them going. And I think you kind of, from the Eagles side too, Jim Schwartz does great things in year one with the defense. And then when it gets to year 2, year 3, some of those things can be found out and kind of deep offenses can figure out how to beat those kind of concepts, so they don't really sustain that type of success for a longer term. So if that team was not the number 1 or number 2 defense in the league last year, like it would have been out of the playoffs, because even, Joe Flacco, even that offense was not good. If you look at a lot of the, advanced statistics and things. So it was really carried by that defense. So if that defense is still not a top 5 unit this year, and you get a season of Deshaun Watson that has looked like the previous seasons of Deshaun Watson, then I think that is definitely going to be, and in a tough division where, Cincinnati should be healthier now with Joe Burrow. I still think Baltimore is going to be really good. The Steelers, I would say they're never really good, but they never lose. So
it's true.
I think Cleveland would, I think, be my fall off candidate.
Interesting. All right, so let me get a prediction here from you if you're comfortable making one, and if you're not, you can just kind of tiptoe around it and give me maybe a couple of teams you're thinking about. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on who you think is coming out of each conference. What's our Super Bowl matchup looking like?
Oh man, yeah. So in the AFC, I'm gonna keep picking the Chiefs until they, prove that I shouldn't. Because it just seems dumb to pick against them, because everyone continues to do it. And then they're just like, now we're just going to go win another Super Bowl. So, for them to not even really be good on offense for pretty much the entire regular season and just be like, we'll figure it out because we have a top 5 defense, and completely turn it on for the playoffs. So I'm going to keep picking the Chiefs to come out of the AFC until proven otherwise. For the NFC, and it's tough, and I think that's what makes the NFC kind of fun, because I think you do have, especially at the top, you have 3 divisions where I think I could see 2 teams from each division coming out. Well, yeah, maybe not so much Dallas. I think Dallas can win the division, but I think again they'll probably get blown through in the playoffs. I think if Philly's good enough to win, the NFC East and be that team throughout the year, then they definitely have that Super Bowl potential. And then it's, Lions, Packers, I could see both of them in, and Niners and Rams too, because I think that offense is going to be good enough where it can carry in defense that's going to try to figure some things out with, trying to host Aaron Donald. But I think that offense is still going to be really good with some of the changes they made mid-season. And Matthew Stafford was incredible last year, and I don't think he got enough credit for what he was able to do. So, man, there's 5 teams I could see coming out of the NFC, but I'll go on a limb because I'll say Green Bay, because I've been pretty high on them all year. So I just think a lot of with what their young talent is going to be, and if that defense clicks, I really think they're going to be really dangerous.
See, Dan, that was a test, and you failed the test.
Sorry,
it should have been Eagles, but I mean, hey, listen, everybody, it's going to be hard for Packers to dig out an 0-1 hole after the loss in Brazil in Week 1. But I guess they'll have to just kind of keep their heads up. No, I mean, I get it. Packers and Lions. Right now I have those 2 teams right at the top of of, power rankings as well, because they do, you like those teams that finished the previous season with momentum, like the moving forward. And the Lions, to me, feel like the team, I have got them atop my NFC rankings right now, because they have the look of that team that they got to the doorstep last year, and they were just, they had a Super Bowl berth there for the taking, and just they let it slip away after San Francisco came back in that NFC Championship game. That, to me, I think that's going to make them super hungry to get back there. But that's a monster division. That's going to be quite a race. I think those two teams could finish with the two best records in the NFC, but one of them is going to be the wild card team, and the other one's going to be the division winner, because they really do look really good. And I'm a guy who thinks the 49ers are going to take a step back this year. That Super Bowl loss, the way they lost it, reminds me of the way the Eagles lost the Super Bowl the previous season, and the difficulties the Eagles had with kind of knowing how to traverse the following season. Like, how do you enjoy the ride the year after something like that, when your overarching goal is just to get back there and win it all? Like, it's very difficult for teams to bounce back after a loss like that in the Super Bowl and get right back there again. So I don't see the 49ers. I think they're going to have a good season, but I don't think the 49ers, I see them taking a step back this year, simply because of the emotional aspect of the way they lost the Super Bowl. Am I crazy?
No, I don't think so. I think that's definitely in the range of possibilities. I would still lean toward there's just so much talent on that team, that I think they'll be able to kind of carry through, even if it doesn't look as good as it did last year, because I think they can still take a step back and still be really good, because this offense was just insane when you kind of look at what their numbers were going on top of like the number 2 team. It was just absolutely ridiculous. Yeah. So I think they could, still take a step back and be one of the top teams in the NFC still. So I wouldn't be surprised if there is a little Super Bowl hangover. But again, that's still probably enough for them to be one of the most competitive teams in the conference.
Yeah, and the Eagles, to in fairness, did make the playoffs. They just didn't look like they looked like the worst team in the NFL by the time the season rolled around, but they did make the playoffs. So anyway, hey, the 33rd Team is a fantastic site. If you aren't on the 33rd Team's website, you got to get on there for this upcoming NFL season. Lots of great insight there. Dan Pizzuta does great work for them. So make sure you check out everything he's got going on over on his X feed at Dan Pizzuta. Dan, thanks for coming back on Eye on the Enemy. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I always enjoy it.
And that's going to do it for this edition of Eye on the Enemy. And make sure, folks, that you're checking out all of the podcasts we have for you here at the Eagles Pin Pull Network. Got a lot of great shows. I want to make sure that you're catching Chalk Talk, Armchair Scouts, On the Shane Page, Birds of the Round Table. Fantastic shows that you can catch here on this Eagles Network. If you are a fan of the Bleeding Green Nation podcast network in the days of yore, then this is the podcast feed for you. If you like what you hear, tell your friends and your family members about us. Help get yourselves ready for Eagles game day by checking out the Eagles Pin Pull Network and downloading our podcast each and every day and get them into your earbuds. Thanks, guys, for tuning in. We'll talk to you next week as we preview Eagles Packers right here on Eye on the Enemy.